Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG Rose,
Rose?
and today we're going to talk about if ideas are bad. Are ideas bad for community, for relationship, for life? You know, so Michelle, are ideas bad? Are ideas bad?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They keep you up at night. They get in your head when you're trying to do things. Ideas are bad. Ideas are bad. So, are ideas
Well,
bad?
I mean, I think we'd have to kind of first ask, like, what do we mean when we say our ideas? Like, what do we mean when we say ideas?
Yeah.
What are ideas? Now, gee, I wish I had like just checked the OED or something
Yeah,
like
right,
that with
right,
the
right.
etymology. I
See
always
what it,
love looking at the
yeah,
etymology of words.
what ideas are. Yeah.
But so I don't have that off the top of my head. But the thing is with ideas, you know, we we usually okay. So I think about it from like almost a younger years perspective to ideas. Really, it to me was almost relegated to like you had an idea, like that's like it was generally kind of portrayed in
Mm-hmm.
school and etc. as like this is a good thing. You
This
had an
is
idea, like
right.
eureka, like a light bulb is associated with it in the West, and so I think generally speaking, ideas, they're these thoughts, they're these, but usually it's kind of associated a bit more with like I had an idea, like you either discovered something or you came up with something, you know, or somebody, now as you get a little bit older, I think you realize, whoa, like ideas, at least I realize like ideas are really everywhere. Um, and you also might get it in like a schemy sense, like, ooh, I've got an idea.
Yep,
Like when
yep,
you're trying
yep.
to solve something or trying to crack a code or whatever, you might see this in like mystery novels or whatever. Nancy Drew. So yeah, I mean, I think in that respect, ideas are, well, first of all, they're just everywhere. Like they are,
Yep.
they're just. But the way that you're asking that question, are ideas bad, already sort of implies a concern
Yep.
with
Yep.
ideas.
Yep.
And
Yep.
obviously, ideas can be extremely risky, risky, very, very risky. That's why, unfortunately, in many sort of regimes in the past, like there's burning of books or, certain,
Yep.
it was one idea versus another idea, or ideology. Ideologies comes from the word idea. So, yeah, I mean, I think that ideas can be bad. However, we do exist as humans with consciousness as idea makers and idea consumers, and we live in ideas. We live through ideas. I mean, we have our essay and was it the first thoughts?
Yeah. 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 Ideas are not experiences, conflict of
Well, that
mind.
one, but also
Yeah.
ideas are
Ideas are
practically
practically eyes, opens
eyes.
thoughts. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Ideas are practically eyes. So, these, we really won't be able to escape ideas
Right.
unless we choose to just
Be
not
thoughtless.
think, but then somebody's thinking for us,
Yeah.
right?
That's right.
Ayn
That's
Rand would
right.
always say about the secondhand smoke,
Yeah.
right?
Right. 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 Right.
You're always going to have somebody thinking about things, and if you're not sure about what your ideas are and don't acknowledge the role, they're very vital. Like they're like fire, right? They're like fire. They're both going to be able to warm you up, but they can also burn things down. I mean, ideas are, we swim in it, we breathe in it, we're around it all the time. So yeah, I think that ideas in that regard, they just exist. It's sort of they're there. Are they bad? Well, they can be bad, they can be good. Now, in terms of pursuing ideas,
Right.
like spending your time on ideas, I mean, that can be good and bad too. In one respect, you're at least kind of, there's a way in which you're getting a little bit more conscious of the fact that ideas are a part of our exchange as human beings, as a part of our lives as human beings. So that's good. But if you just get into ideas and never really put them into practice, that can be risky because you're not really, now, but what if it's a really bad idea and you shouldn't put it into practice?
Right.
But I do think at least acknowledging that, they matter. They really do matter. They do make a huge difference. Do please read our essays on this topic, because we both have the point of view that ideas are practically eyes, but then also ideas are not experiences.
Right.
So there's a bothness to this.
Yes.
There's a nuance to
Right.
this.
Exactly.
There's a bothness to ideas. They're like fire. I've also thought about, often thought about philosophy like fire too. And
Yeah.
philosophy, what is it but ideas, right?
Right.
So I have some more to say, but I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, it's just very interesting because there's this one way in which, going to college, getting educated, getting good ideas is how you advance. Then
Mm-hmm.
there's another part where Bernard would talk about this, how that's a great idea. Like it's a key, it solves the problem,
Right,
right?
right.
Like ideas solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's an idea that good ideas about how to make the world a better place get us in huge trouble and cause
Mm-hmm.
war,
Mm-hmm.
like a
Mm-hmm.
Thomas Sowell. That's a conservative sort of notion that ideas cause a whole lot of trouble.
Mm.
Then there's an impulse, then there's an emphasis on creativity and entrepreneurship to come up with ideas for new products and how that makes a big difference.
Mm.
Then there's also just the reality that you already have ideas. Like you have them. So that it's not like this idea that there are idea people and then there are non-idea people.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Mm-hmm.
sense in which that's false. Everyone has ideas, right?
Absolutely.
The question is focusing on ideas.
Spending time.
Spending time on ideas, right? And also there aren't just ideas. There are different kinds of ideas. There's the idea of what I'm going to eat tonight. There's the idea of how to drive to the store. There's the idea of of how to understand the Trinity. There's the idea of how to spend your time. Like there are many ideas in different ways, and there's some sort of notion that some ideas are not worth focusing on. But there's also a suggestion that there are some ideas that are worth focusing on, and problematically you need an idea to know which is which. So this is the problem, is that like any view you have of ideas itself will be an idea, right? And any way you discern good idea, bad idea, itself will be an idea, and that will need an idea, and that will need, and you get into kind of an eternal regress, right? So there's also this idea that ideas can eternally regress. They just lead one thing to ever, and you waste a whole lot of time. So there has to be something that ideas stop on, right? And who decides what that is without it being totalitarian? So don't worry about it. Now, this is where people like Richard Rorty or the pragmatists or Peirce or my beloved Hume are going to say, well, ideas stop at suchness, at common life, right? And if you're not conscious of ideas, then ideas, you may not care about ideas, but ideas still care about you, right? And this is where there's also a notion that ideas are self-defense. Because there's another question here, I'm just opening with thoughts, like, do ideas change people? Like, do ideas actually make a difference? Do they change people, right? Well, obviously, ideas by people like Hayek or Marx or Adam Smith change the world. They have a massive impact on the world. Ideas matter. They really matter. But then there's another weird way in which it seems like ideas don't matter because people don't change their behavior. And so then people get skeptical of ideas, and they just think that ideas are in service of your tribe. They don't really change people. And that you really shouldn't focus on ideas, because if you're focusing on the ideas, you're not using your time on, say, relationships or people, and that's selfish, or community. So there's a whole sort of mixture of concerns. But I guess I would just start, and I'll throw it at you on any reaction to any of that, is that you already have ideas.
Yes.
So it's not really ideas versus no ideas. The question is, to what degree should you focus on ideas, and what kind of ideas? Should you focus on debates about the best socioeconomic system, or should you focus on ideas about how to, say, condition your life to experience the beautiful, because that's something you can actually live in your immediate life, and that could impact your relationships? Oh, but what if your ability to experience beauty is impacted by the habituation of the socioeconomic system? Right? How do you know? How can you tell without thinking? Right? So those are some opening reactions.
Yeah, that's all really good, Daniel. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people may have concerns with it taking away from relationships, community, etc., because it feels so heady. Like it feels so, kind of it'll be said, like head on a stick type of thing. It's sort of this vacuum of your brain thinking ideas, where obviously it's never just that. You're always in an excess of relationships and experiences and all of that. But I do think and I don't know if it's just because of our institutional understanding and patterning, it's sort of thought that, ideas are this thing that just happen apart from the lived experience, apart from relationships, apart from community.
Ideas are about getting a job, and you shouldn't be bringing ideas into your relationships because you're not at work. There's also that. You learn ideas to go to college to get certification, and why are you worried about ideas in relationships, seeing that that's about getting certified for a job? I think that's part of it too, not to interrupt.
As you already said, though, that is an idea.
So
I mean, when you're going to critique idea,
you have to use an idea.
You're using ideas to critique ideas.
Yeah.
So, that's...
So where did that idea come from?
Exactly. Right? And I think that's where it's a bit more like, it's important that we learn to be humbled in that regard. Like, I guess I do have an idea, even though I'm critiquing ideas,
Mm-hmm.
or even though I'm judging, or even judging
Yeah.
not having ideas, or like, or I mean, everyone has ideas, but you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, oh, they're not really giving time to cultivating practice
Right.
of what is, what are ideas, right?
Right.
But either way, one should be it's a humbling idea. It's humbling when you realize that where did that idea come from in the first
Yeah.
place, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of from you and kind of not from you. It's from like your lineage and
Yep.
your social context and your
Yep.
just your lived
Yep.
experience,
Yep.
your ecology. Like
Yep.
so it's important to be humbled in that regard. And I think though, understanding, I mean, maybe one would just have to first accept that we do operate in ideas anyway.
Yep.
I mean, would that be as I don't know, but again, it's a little bit hard. It almost feels like how people get so like upset with Hegel because Hegel just like consumes it all, right? It always just goes back like Hegel's system
Right.
can involve
Yeah.
your system that doesn't involve Hegel's system, and it's just. But I think there's something true to the fact that
Yeah. Sure.
there's a way in which you cannot escape the reality of
Yep.
ideas. Like again,
Yeah.
even to question ideas, or even to say no, we don't have ideas as humans, or no, we shouldn't have ideas.
Yes.
That's not, these are ideas. These are thoughts. And I do think maybe it's existential because it does tie into this idea of like, where are these things coming from, and should we have thoughts? And
Yep.
I don't know. I think there can be something kind of existential about it.
Well, there's a few things. So I think the question is also conditional to the moment in history. Like, so for example, is it the case that you must have philosophy, which I kind of will use here interchangeably with ideas? By philosophy, I have a certain kind of focus on ideas in mind. It's not merely the having of the ideas, but the thinking about thinking,
Yeah,
and trying to kind of work through that.
Right.
It is certainly not the case that you need philosophy to have good relationships or to have a good life. However, there's always this sort of question of kind of, I want to say making a bet, although there might be a better way to language it. Like, what is a good investment? Like, what is a good bet to take? To say something very general, the less technologically advanced and globalized the world, the higher the likelihood that taking the bet of not focusing on philosophy will be fine. You'll be fine.
So you said
The less technologically advanced and the less
less globally-
globalized
yeah,
the world
globalized.
is, then not focused on philosophy is probably fine. It's probably a pretty good bet,
Yeah.
Now, I would still argue that it can open you up to beauty and engaging conversation in ways. So I would have a bias to say there's still, nevertheless, advantages to it. But is it as pressing? I want to say,
Yeah.
like, no, it's not as pressing. However, as the world becomes more globalized, as you're
Yes.
using the internet, as governments have abilities to monitor or control information flow, as you're overwhelmed with information, as you're encountering diversity, the need for the bet that you don't need philosophy is less likely to work out. Could it work out? Sure, but it is less likely to work out. I always love what Lorenzo always would emphasize thinking about epistemology as a portfolio. Kind of, we've called it in one of our talks financial epistemology, and there's kind of an investment mindset here. So, and if you ask, is philosophy right or wrong? It's not really helpful.
Yeah.
We'll talk about overfitting and underfitting, but what Lorenzo would kind of say is philosophy a good investment? Are you likely to get a good return on your investment? Now, that may sound overly pragmatic. However, sometimes you can go too far against pragmatism.
Yeah.
You can go too far against it. It just depends. And basically, the suggestion I'm saying is that the likelihood that investing in philosophy is going to give you a good return, to use that financial epistemology, goes up, if not skyrockets, as the world globalizes, as it becomes complex, as you're encountering people who live their lives very different. The loss of givens we talk about with belonging again. The likelihood that philosophy is a good return on your time, if not dire, like a direly beneficial, is much higher, because it's like what Peter Berger said, and I'll throw it back to you on any thoughts, because I'm about to get into David Hume, but I'll resist. Is that Peter Berger says we're all existentialists now. Like everyone
Peter
is.
Berger says
Peter
this?
Berger
Okay.
says this. Everyone is an existentialist now.
Yeah.
After globalization and so on and so forth. The loss of enchantment, as Charles Taylor says. Well, in a world where everyone is an existentialist, basically everyone, is certainly in first world. Like the movement from a third world nation to a first world nation and this is all very general, and I'd have to go into it, but basically that movement, as you move from third world to first world, the likelihood you need philosophy goes up.
Yeah.
It goes up. When you're less technologically advanced and most of your time is being used on tasks, the tasks
Yeah.
can bind community, the
Yeah.
tasks can bind relationships. But as you get more free time,
Hmm.
ironically, you need more philosophy, or else weirdly an increase of free time leads to an increased burnout, because in your free time you feel guilty for having free time, your boss expects more of you, you move from blue collar to white collar, and weirdly increased free time leads to greater work and obligation. And if you don't
Mm.
have philosophy to self-defend yourself from that, or
Yeah.
to kind of navigate that, you're going to get a lot of the stuff that Han's talking about with the
Yeah.
burnout society. You're just going to get pulled into all of that.
Yeah.
Now there's a lot more to be said on that, but basically, and that would all really need to be expanded on, but
Mm.
basically, if it is the case that we're all existentialists now, if you're an existentialist and you don't have philosophy, then you're really in trouble,
Mm.
because existentialism is fundamentally a philosophical condition
Mhm.
that you have to wrestle with and wrestle through.
Yeah.
So if you don't have it and you're an existentialist now, you're just in trouble. Well, for people like Korbowski and Berger, you're going to have mental health problems, big time. And you could argue that our world is kind of showing that. I'll pause and throw it to you.
Yeah, golly, there's so many good things you said there, Daniel. Where do I want to begin? Well, let me try and do it in order.
Sure.
I was thinking about the last two talks we had, and again, the
Right.
lack of enchantment. Again, philosophizing your life would have to do with having ideas,
Yes.
valuing
Absolutely.
ideas, valuing
Absolutely.
another person's ideas. And so that is a way to re-enchant. That's why valuing ideas and acknowledging, well, look, we can't kind of escape them, so we may as well get kind of good at them, or
Right.
and have like a sense of reverence in a regard for the fact that this is our atmosphere, right? So re-enchantment, I think ideas can potentially re-enchant life. I really do, because I was going to also say a little bit ago that for me, ideas are really, just like that kind of illuminating moment, eureka or whatever. It's exciting. Like, ideas are interesting. Like, ideas are fascinating. Yes, they can also be really scary and risky. But this is the thing. I often find that the people who see like, okay, well, we do ideas, so let's get, when I say get good at them, what I mean is actually be open to playing around with ideas, to talking about ideas, to talking about why we talk about ideas.
Right.
That is actually a much safer zone, in a sense,
Yep.
than when people kind of almost want to disavow ideas,
Yep.
but we're still using ideas.
Yep.
And then it's like, now the ideas really do feel a bit more caustic, or like kind of, is that the right word I'm trying to use? They can feel a bit more like, how do I put this? Because it's almost like people are it's almost like
they're too precious in a weird way. You hold it, you over-identify with them.
Exactly. And it's
Yeah.
almost like
Mhm.
harder to have a more
Weirdly.
lighthearted,
Weirdly. Yeah.
fruitful kind of
Yes.
conversation when, when people are kind of like always, it's almost like they're saying ideas and philosophy is this sort of like ivory tower,
Yep.
distant
Yep.
abstraction.
Yes.
And then you go to have a conversation with them, which you're happy to
Yes.
do, but somehow it feels like, and maybe Luke Thompson mentioned this actually a little bit about this, like this concept of feeling, you really feel it, this sense of, oh, this person is actually not here to talk about ideas with their sort of, like you said, this sort of with an idea without the acknowledgement of ideas. It's almost like having to come.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a strange dynamic, but I you can sense it, and you try, but I think we should be called in that moment to hopefully take a deep breath, get ourselves calm, to be able to still be present in that, even though it can feel difficult, because suddenly, like it's almost, for lack of a better analogy, it's almost like somebody not knowing how to use a weapon, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
they're just swinging this thing around, and you're like, oh my.
Well, not
versus like a yo-yo, because anyways, if you had like a yo-yo can become very dangerous,
if you don't know how to use it.
If you don't know how to use it, or whatever it is, if you don't know how to use fire, then you're like, oh my gosh, this person's like,
Yes.
they're using fire. All while they say we don't need fire, basically.
Yes.
And you're just sitting there like, I'd love to light some candles or like have a nice bonfire,
Yes.
or like, have
Yes.
whatever it is to do it in like a warm up by it. And you're like, that would be really lovely. But the other person is not quite there. And yet they're just like shooting a fire gun around. And you're like, this feels really, but again, I think you still need to be present in that and learn how to be open to the other in that, because they're an other in a sense, in the regard that not as a us versus them or whatever, but you want to try to be able to like keep an openness to that difference. and still be able to engage in conversation, and maybe respect that this is not the time to do the philosophy stuff. If you, I don't even think of it that way, you don't either, but it's what a lot of people label it as, right? But let me see if I can find a way to, let's aim this gun, like, let's put some targets up, or let's make it something where we can still have a conversation, because they're still using that fire gun. So anyways, I hope that analogy.
No, very good, and I don't mean to interrupt,
No,
but this
please,
is extremely important,
Yeah.
is that in a globalized world, ideas are going to come up, and ideas are freaking dangerous.
Yes,
and if you
exactly.
don't talk about ideas, then you're going to misuse them. And look how many families are destroyed by talking about the election, talking about some thing in the news, because you're on the internet, you're in a globalized
Seeing
world,
stuff.
ideas are going to come up, your
Yeah.
uncle's talking at Thanksgiving, you get upset. The weird thing is that talking about ideas make you actually not overly identify with them.
Exactly.
So you loosen your grip with them. The ability to talk about, and also, so there's another thing, I can't remember who said it, but it's the idea that if you don't talk about ideas, you're going to talk about people. And so you got two options. What ends up happening is without philosophy, you end up either talking about people, which
basically
gets into
gossiping.
judgmentalism, gossiping, or when you go up to ideas, everyone's over-identified with them, and then a war starts. Unless everyone agrees, and if everyone agrees, you could argue you're not even thinking. It's just confirmation bias, right? And if someone disagrees, and the other thing is the course of life is such that a crisis is going to happen, or something's going to occur unexpected, where you're going to have to get into an idea talk. And you've never had one before, and you don't know what to do, whether it be your personal finance, the election, a decision on work, family work balance, whatever. All of these are in the realm of, like, what is a love language?
Yeah.
This is the realm of ideas. And maybe you go for 30 years just fine without talking about ideas, and you get by. But the day comes with the unexpected. And because it is a firearm, it is a weapon, you misfire, and someone's permanently injured, or someone's injured severely. You could go for 30, you can go for 30 years not injuring someone with a weapon, and then one day injure them with a weapon, and the consequences are lifelong now. So talking about ideas weirdly weakens them. People think if you talk about ideas, you over-glorify them and you lift them up and they take over your life. It's the exact opposite. You talk about ideas and they become weaker. They don't control you as much. People think if you focus on ideas that they control your life and you're not focused on your relationships and you're pulled out of the stuff that matters. No, actually, it's how you weaken ideas so they don't pull you out the stuff that matters. Because you just see, look how many families have been destroyed by political discussions. Look how many people have relationships ruined because of bad ideas or bringing up ideas and not being able to talk about it. Or how many couples, because the husband or the wife wants to talk about something that concerns them, but the other person takes it personally and everything blows up.
Yeah.
So everything you're saying, I didn't mean to interrupt, but everything you're saying is a huge deal. Huge deal.
No, it's big, and I think everything you said was spot on. And there's also this feeling like, I think that people who talk about ideas or do this thing of philosophizing are kind of thought of as like, oh, you just must love ideas. Oh, you must just love
We don't want them to destroy our lives.
Exactly.
Ideas are out to destroy your life.
And that's the thing. It's like, no, we just realize that they're very dangerous.
Yes.
But also, they're also very
unavoidable.
necessary.
They're dangerous but unavoidable, especially in a globalized world.
They're dangerous but unavoidable, and also potentially magical, wonderful, enchanting, right? Like we said, like in the sense of the fire. Fire
Well, every advancement in history from that kind of Christian or Hegelian sense is every advancement, which today basically you're in the historic age where I would argue ideas are practically necessary, unless you're very isolated. In that comes this new challenge, but also the possibility of greater intrinsic motivation, greater drive, greater beauty, greater depths. So you always, as you have the condition of history change, you get new challenges, but new opportunities. So now a philosophical age, as basically Hume and Berger and all of them talk about, is one that has greater potential for wonder and philosophical friendship, as Jockin says.
Yes.
But it also brings with it greater chance of mental illness and philosophical tyranny. And that gets into Hume a bit, but I'll stop.
Yeah. No, I think this is huge. Yeah, this is big. And I mean, I think the other thing too is, I think maybe just from a time standpoint, people are thinking, well, if you do this for this amount of time, it's taking away from doing something communal, right? Never mind the fact of like, well, what is community? What is communal? What does it mean to do community? Like we talked about, like one of the most quotidian, as in like every day of your life type of community is a husband and wife relationship.
That's right.
And yet, because that's not thought of as a community event or whatever, community activity, people don't know how to do that very well. And that's sad, because what a beautiful, almost inherent opportunity to cultivate community and, a communal opportunity, for lack of a better word, and yet it's not thought of as being communal. So then, for the sake of doing something communal, you sacrifice, or you literally potentially sacrifice the very thing which would be the foremost opportunity and practice of doing something that is communal. Communal is not just a numbers thing; it's a quality.
Yes, it's a quality.
It's a quality of engagement.
Well, to say something that would have to be
Yeah, I mean, to say
justified.
something very bold, I'm just basically of the opinion that the quality of your life is radically impacted by your ability to have conversation. If you can't engage in
Yeah.
conversation, the quality of your life is radically impacted, and philosophy teaches you how to have conversation. Now, that would have to be explained, and a lot more has to be said. But if you don't have philosophy, you're not, conversation will be difficult. As it's the realm that trains you in the practice of conversation.
Yeah.
Not because you need to talk about, not because you need metaphysics or freedom
Yeah.
or justice to have conversation, but the ability to sustain a thread, to focus on something, to know to kind of have a sense of what would be the next question that's fitting to continue the conversation. There's a skill set that philosophy trains that if you don't have, you're probably not going to be good at conversation. And conversation, if you're not good at that, is going to be that's going to be a major problem in your marriages, your relationships, your friendships. That you will pay a price for not being able to converse.
When you said you don't need you mean you don't need to know, like, you don't need to be talking in terms of freedom, justice, what would
Yeah, correct. I mean, it's not because you need the topics of philosophy in
yeah,
order to have
Conversation.
conversation, but philosophy, it trains you
to be in a mode.
to be in a mode. And typically it starts about freedom because that's universal and it's uncontingent. Once you start having deeper conversations about people or your job, it's really close to the chest and become emotionally intense. It can be too emotionally intense to go straight into a long conversation about your marriage. But if you're used to doing it about freedom, which doesn't have as much of an emotional reaction, a knee jerk, you get used to that. You can gradually work it down to then bringing philosophy into your marriage or a tough conversation at work or something like that, so you don't break the thread. Because a lot of the most important conversations, I mean, there's also something to be said that much of your life comes down to 5 or 7 important conversations or decisions. Those conversations tend to be ones that are extensive and extended, and if you're not able to keep yourself from having an emotional reaction because you get upset or a knee-jerk reaction in those moments, it can make a massive difference for the worse. And if you've done training to talk about the abstract to bring it in to the personal, then you're more likely to be able to handle it. And then you can also sense where you need to jump back to the abstract because you've been in the personal too long, or now you're actually in gossip, so let's jump back up, then move down. But without philosophy, you're not able to change the frames. So you tend to be overly personal, or I would argue overly abstract. I would say philosophy actually can make you not overly abstract. Like, people spend all of their time talking about stuff that doesn't matter constantly. TV shows, games, whatever. Like, it's interesting how we don't consider that stuff abstract, but I would argue it's very abstract because it doesn't matter. And yet that stuff is considered good for relationships. When in a sense it's very abstract. It does not have, it's abstracted from daily life. It's abstracted from you in a way. It's just what you're consuming. And it's just interesting that we have but anyway.
Yeah, it makes me think, that's all very good. And I think that, one of the things that philosophy and realizing that ideas are something you can kind of acknowledge and then start to become more cognizant of, and maybe even be more open to or play with or think through, is that it actually gives that, like we talked about in Philosophize Your Life, is that you're taking a step back, you're suspending your judgment. And you actually need a suspension of judgment to have a more productive conversation with your spouse or your friend or your child or whoever it is. You need to be able to suspend your judgment, and be able to participate in more of that. We're not emotionally attached to anything here, in terms of we're just literally trying to let the ideas present themselves and be contended with and discuss and consider. So there's that. Oh, and the other thought I had was about how perhaps just the thought is, and maybe it's because of the nature of the internet and the medium itself, where people can only think about a podcast or even this YouTube, episode right now. Like, it's thought of as separate from, breaking bread, or,
Yeah,
or
sure.
just like I think about in mothering and like motherhood friendships, where it's just somebody helps hold a child, or helps open, put on a Barbie clothes for this other, or doll clothes for this child, or they're helping with these kind of quotidian
Right.
little small tasks and such things. Maybe the concern is that, well, conversation is just this isolated event. Again, maybe it's our medium though that kind of keeps training us to think that that's it, all that it is, when really conversation historically has always been over over a table, while breaking bread, while nursing children and taking care of them, and while doing the the things that you were able to do, the tasks, and have enriching conversation or song, or these types of communal and liturgies, or whatever you would have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, I guess I think that that might be levied on conversation. And yet I still don't think, I think most people would recognize how valuable conversation is, and how well, and goes to the point that you were making in your talk with Christian Baxter, about how most people hate conversation.
They hate conversation.
Unfortunately,
They hate conversation.
it's scary, and it's
Yeah.
boring, and it's kind of like you feel possibly interrogated. So
Yes.
why risk it?
Yeah, well,
So unfortunately, if that's what people think of conversation, maybe it's like a pendulum. It's like either just scrap it, no conversation, right? Or conversation is too heady and
yeah.
abstract, and it's taking us away from making a meal or sharing a meal
Yes.
with each other. And really, it's almost like, really, conversation is the ability to almost enhance every minute of your life.
Yes,
Like
yes,
you literally
yes,
can, I mean,
yes.
you don't have to, yes, there's also a place for silence. We talked about this in
Yes,
our
yes,
last episode
yes,
of season
yes.
1, where we talked about how people will say, well, you just need to be able to be in silence together. True, but people are on their phones. They're like, they're not really silent. They're like visually not silent,
Yes.
a lot of the time. So, yes, there's a place for silence. Of course there is, but there's also the ability to have good conversation. You're sitting on a porch, you can have a conversation. You're walking somewhere, you can have a conversation. You're going to have a conversation with yourself in your head, probably.
Yes.
You can
Yes.
have a conversation is such a important. And also there's a lot of all of the ancient traditions that did talk about being aware of your words. I mean, the fact of doing conversations in maybe these more kind of potent arenas or something, I think should also help us to know the value and power of words, so that you realize, oh, I don't have to talk just to fill the space.
Yes.
Right. However, if I'm going to talk, let it be of something of value. Let it be of something of humility, or something where I can hear the other person's perspective and listen and really engage.
Yes.
And really maybe ask them some questions, not from an interrogation perspective, but from genuine curiosity and genuine presence. So anyways,
But without
Yeah.
philosophy, how do you talk to someone and not interrogate them? What did you do to, or exchange trivia or gossip,
well,
right?
so many people have been hurt because they had an idea and somebody just shut it down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right,
it's just like,
right.
oh, just
Yeah.
for really no reason. I don't know, except maybe a power struggle. I don't know.
I think people, so there's a few things. Generally, people are scared of ideas. They hate ideas because ideas can make you change your life. And basically, the most natural thing in the world is to say or do whatever you need to do to not change. That's what people are on average doing all the time. So they'll take whatever position in an argument they need to take. Ideas matter because they already engage in ideas, so they wouldn't have to change. So they'll take that. Or ideas don't matter because they're already engaged not in ideas, so they won't have to change, right? So and the same goes with politics. The same goes with everything. Like, the position people want to take is the position that lets them keep in the lane they're already in. And so a conversation about ideas is naturally experienced as threatening, because what can it possibly do but send you in a new direction?
But destabilize
But
you, right?
destabilize you, right?
potentially.
Or confirm what you already think, so you gain nothing. It either confirms what you already think, so there's no value, or it makes you change your life, which is terrible, so it's negative value. So it's either neutral or negative. Unless you buy the premise that you must change your life, that ideas actually enhance your experience, and it opens you up to a horizon of quality of life that can be no other way. But here's the problem. If you've never experienced that, then you don't buy that premise, so you don't believe in that premise, therefore it's rational to maintain the status quo, because the options are only for you, neutral or worse. So people are being rational in that sense,
Neutral
but the
or
true
worse.
isn't the rational.
Well,
Please.
so, but couldn't it also, so neutral or worse, or it affirms what you already believe, what you said it doesn't have value?
Yeah, because
But
you already
don't-
believe it.
But don't people kind of sometimes criticize ideas as people just in their little echo chambers
That's the
affirming
irony.
their
That's the
ideas.
irony, because that's the disavow.
Like people
Like, you
do get something
see
out of it
that
in
in
terms
order
of,
not to see it in yourself. I mean, there's that, and yes, there can be idea talk that is
It's
just
simply just-
confirmation. But you could argue that's idea talk without philosophy. Like, there is something to be said about an intellectualism that doesn't have self-criticism that is likely to end up there. Oh, and if you think you're self-critical, you're probably not. So there's that ever sort of having to check and balance yourself. There is something to be said about problematic idea conversations that are self-confirmation.
Right.
And that's why you want to get into the art of philosophy and really invest in it, to make sure you're not doing that.
Yeah.
But anyone could, of course, say that's all people are doing, but that could also be a disavow, right? And you can only know if you get in there. The other thing, excuse me, that I was going to say is, there's also, it's a giant claim, our subjectivity and our experience of the world is impacted by how we use language in profound ways we don't appreciate. Like, it may seem ridiculous, but your ability to say enjoy poetry or to have philosophical discussion will literally impact how you see a tree. Like, in a deep sense, it will literally impact how you walk through the forest and do things unrelated to philosophy, because language changes your experience of the world. And so another reason you want to do this is basically to open up the world to you. And you have to, there's, you know, in the beginning was the word, there's something about language that literally opens up reality. So there's an argument to be made is, you know, the only way to be truly practical is to experience the world in the fullness of the world. Like, anything less than the fullness of the world, and your pragmatism will not be but so practical, right? So you could argue that if indeed language opens up the world, philosophy is like necessary for the full exercise of language, well, then philosophy is necessary to be practical, because otherwise you're not going to be practical relative to the actual world, if you will, the full world that's there, right? So language shapes us in really profound ways. The way we use language impacts how much we can control our emotions, I would argue, our ability to focus, our ability to have attention, which everyone's talking about now with McGilchrist and Illich and Simone and different people, so if you can't have, if you can't engage in conversation, your experience of reality will be less. And then, of course, you won't think you're missing out on anything, because you're not experiencing what you're missing. Therefore, you're missing nothing, and hell's locked from the inside. There's always that kind of tension there.
Well, yeah, I mean, no, that's all very good. And I mean, it's kind of been said, but just to sort of reiterate, if you want to be able to do community and do relationships, you're going to be having conversations there.
Yes.
And conversations are related to ideas. So, you know, what type of quality of a community do you want? Unless you want to just say, well, it's not about the quality. It's just about the community.
Just about being together. Quantity.
But is it?
Yeah. Right.
I mean, but is it? I mean,
nobody means that. I've never met anyone who means that. Like, if you say it's just about being together, people say that and then they just happen to miss next week and they drift. That game. That's what begins happening.
Yeah. Well, and also, maybe it's this sort of self-serving, or not self-serving, opposite of self-serving, self-sacrifice of like, well, we're not going to worry about the quality, but we're going to just do community because community is important, and it's for other
when you
people.
can't
It's not
create
about
quality. No, this and that. You know, you mentioned Rand. This gets a little bit into Rand here. Is that if you can't hold a community together with quality, there's only one way to do it. Basically, guilt, sacrifice, obligation, force, duty. And a whole lot of communities are held together by duty, and those create their own mental health problems, and so on and so forth. Families hold themselves together by duty. Relationships hold themselves by duty. Like, when love, and we talked about this with Jockin and Econ, when love becomes duty instead of covenant, you're in trouble. Like, you know, when love becomes duty instead of covenant, and covenant's a matter of beauty, you've turned heaven into hell. And a lot of communities, here's the issue. Most people, they don't have good things to say about community and relationships. They were horrible experiences for a lot of people. They were traumatized by them. They're trying to escape them. So there's also this idea that when people talk about community with this kind of innate good, there's a whole lot of people that don't feel that way at all. So, and the question is, why don't they feel that way? Because often they were held together by guilt and law and obligation. They were not held by wonder or engaging conversation or beauty or things, because you can't hold a community together with those things unless you have some degree of philosophical training, especially in a globalized world.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
not going to have that ability to expand how people experience the world.
Yeah.
So that's another. I mean, so you need to engage in it. So yeah, like a lot of people, community is not something um, that's a positive thing for them.
Well, what would you say to the person who's like, well, okay, I guess I hear what you're saying. Maybe I just got lucky, but I've always had a wonderful experience of community.
And you're probably in an area, and that's wonderful, but you're probably in an area with people who are like you, who are similar, and that is going to work until the unexpected occurs, until the other shows up, and you're either going to have to kick them out because you can't integrate them in. You're going to have to engage in repression and closed-mindedness. You're going to have to create a new neurotic structure in the Lacanian sense. You're going to have to go to you're going to have to seek a form of belonging that is in the old register that we talk about in the book, that is susceptible to all sorts of pathologies.
Well, that and true, yeah. And I mean, obviously, this is just some hypothetical person talking about their positive experience of community.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think anyone admit or could attest to the fact that people have had positive experiences of community, and that's wonderful. But you have to start to get into, was that the community, or was it their subjectivity in that community?
Yes.
That actually made it a wonderful experience.
Yes,
Does that
and
make
I
sense?
think
Because
there's also people who will not admit if they had bad experiences in community, because that's unspeakable, and that's like a sin to even say, right? So there's repression that goes on too.
Yeah. Well, and I do think that, yeah, true, very true. And I do think that it's sort of like, two people could be, two people could have the exact same day, and one person can say it was miserable and the other person can say it was wonderful. So I'm saying, like, their subjectivity is going to really, really impact their ability to experience the community as a positive and wonderful thing.
Yeah, someone in that same community may have had a terrible experience.
Exactly. And that often happens too. Why do some people stay to church and the other people leave, right?
Yes.
Or why do some people become an atheist from that church and some people become more fervent believers or whatever? So
there is an idea in philosophy that the more you move to abstraction, actually, in orbit and abstraction, that the likelihood everyone agrees in the wonder is higher, because it's not in the particular that tends to be divided across different subjective experience. So there's an idea that as you move into topics like the good, the true, the beautiful, or discuss ideas, the probability that everyone actually genuinely enjoyed it goes up, because it's not because it's beyond contingency. It's beyond particularity. Now, that doesn't always hold, of course, but there is an idea that when you're dealing with diverse people, if you're trying to bring them together, the more you go into the idea realm or the creative act, art, like as you move up, then the ability to bring people together and everyone have a shared experience is higher. But if the community, like, for example, let's say the community gather is held together, but it's a dinner, there's pony rides or stuff like that. Maybe 80% of people love dinner and pony rides, but the other 20% it's boring and they don't enjoy it at all, right? But if you start getting into the beautiful and actually sort of the engagement, there's an idea that there's a higher likelihood you're going to get 95% of people there that are going to be engaged in it. And I mean, to that point, I've never met anyone who doesn't love fully engaging conversation. And I've never met anyone who doesn't like conversation. It's just that they come to say they're not a talker because they're so used to bad conversation. But if you get on a topic they like, they'll talk all day. So if conversation, like if it is the case that truly engaging conversation has a higher probability to bring more diverse people together than pony rides, then the more you can move into that realm, the higher the chance that the communal experience is genuinely an experience, right? That people feel belonging in.
Yeah, no, that's all very good. And it also made me think about the fact that also, if we're honest, sometimes the cry for community can also come from people who, well, look, every person can sort of be seen to not be doing the thing that they're talking about or whatever it is, right? But you'd really have to get down to the very particular, and this is where philosophy will also be helpful, right? Because you'd be like, oh, well, what does it actually mean? Like, I have an idea of what community means. What's their idea of community, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think, just to circle back to that point about like the spouses being like the foremost community, right? If
some people can seek community to avoid their marriages. People can seek community to avoid themselves.
But like the spouses really have a hard time with each other.
That can happen.
Then it's almost like, in what meaningful sense is that community
It's
of
bad.
a
In
higher
that
moral
sense, it's
value.
bad. Yeah, exactly. People can seek relationships to avoid doing the work on themselves they
Yeah,
need to do, to
yeah,
avoid their spouse, to avoid their children. I mean, in that sense, no, community is not an inherent good. It has to be rightly ordered.
rightly
Like there are
ordered. Yeah,
no inherently good things in the same way that except God, but
yes.
there's also no inherently bad things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all about the ordering.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
but if it's about the ordering, then you need the ability to order. And I would argue philosophy is the ability to order. Therefore, in that sense, it's necessary because it is the ability to order. Because the ordering itself is not a material thing. The things you need to order are material. They're in materiality. But the ordering of the material things is not itself material. It's real, like relations. Relations are real, and yet they're not material, in a sense, right? So it goes with the order that things are put in. That itself is in a sense pure idea. So if everything's going to come down to ordering and how it is oriented and approached, then philosophy is the necessary art form for that orienting. And if you don't do it and you start getting pathologies, you're not even going to be able to tell why that is happening, because you need the idea to know it, and now you're locked from the inside. I mean, life is so much about avoiding some hell that's locked from the inside. An enclosure, as we call it. So much of life is just about avoiding enclosures, and that's about ordering, and ordering is trained in philosophy. Please.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the wonderful Vessel Village and the women at the Village podcast, or sorry, Village Sessions podcast. I wanted to get the name right. Sorry, Corey, Molly, and Michelle, and they have a lot of wisdom. I would definitely highly recommend them. And so the Vessel Village is something that Molly and Michelle created, and they talk a lot about how there's this kind of cry for community, but women aren't cultivating themselves. It starts with you. Women are not cultivating and developing themselves to the place where community just flows from them. It's community is, yes, people, and it's also a mode. It's like a way of being in the world, you know. And and this also makes me think. So yeah, that's profound and important because what do you mean even when you're asking what do you even know what you want when you say I want more community? Like what do you want? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it mean to you? All of those questions are really important to get into, and then also you have to start thinking about why am I just asking for something that I don't even necessarily, I may not have even developed the subjectivity enough to be able to recognize.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So,
well, I mean, you could argue from a demonic standpoint that as a demonic sort of spiritual warfare attack, if I can make you genuinely want something that you genuinely need,
that you need,
but then when you go into it, it's a disaster. Well, now that's way better than keeping it from you, right? So, as a demonic strategy, to use that language, keeping you from doing something that is good, like community, is not nearly as effective as a kind of final victory as if I can let you enter that thing you need and it goes horribly because you've disavowed philosophy or you've not done the work on yourself for it, and then I won't even have to keep you from it. You won't want it. And that's true damnation. Damnation is not when the devil keeps you from entering hell. Damnation is when you lock yourself inside of hell. I mean, if the devil can't keep you in hell. There's that idea because the devil doesn't have power, and that's a theological notion. But I think that is true to life. Bad things in life can't keep you in the bad things like that. Now, there is something to be said about dictators and prison and stuff. But if we're talking these sort of spiritual battles or forms of subjectivity, you have to keep yourself in the bad place. And that means if you're not prepared for community and it goes bad, you won't enter it and you'll think it's wise and your life is in trouble now.
100%. Or alternatively, you always just want it, but never do any action toward it.
Yes, that's just
and
as
then you
effective.
can always basically blame something else, right? It just it doesn't exist, or it won't exist, or it's there's some way, whatever story you tell yourself about the fact that, well, it's just I wish it were there but it's not kind of concept.
I mean,
and it's like that's another keeping you locked and enclosed, because if you never, it's like saying I wish I were a poet, but then you don't ever actually allow yourself to write poetry because the potential failure of writing the poetry and feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel like I actually just suck at this, or nobody likes it, is harder than the reality, than just keeping yourself from ever doing it in the first place, all while you say you want to do it.
Yes, right? Yes, absolutely. I mean, what I was just going to say is I sometimes think this interesting, there's this feeling that people have, or this notion that philosophy and relationships
exist in they hurt each other, that philosophy hurts relationships. Sometimes to me this feels like a demonic trick, because in my experience philosophy is what makes relationships wonderful or blossom to their fullness. Far from philosophy hurt relationships, it actually blossoms them and it opens up. Well, if the devil, or principalities or whatever can convince you that philosophy hurts relationships, then you're not going to do the thing that you need for relationships to blossom. Then the relationships will be bad and you'll become a hikikomori. And that's a way more effective strategy than keeping you from relationships. Now, I'll go into it next. There is a form of relationship that keeps out of philosophy that keeps out the other. There is a form of philosophy that is bad, as David Hume says, and that has to be identified for. But the ability to tell the difference between good philosophy and bad philosophy itself requires philosophy, and that's always the problem. Is like even being able to tell that difference requires you to go into the realm of ideas. So let me put it this way. If outside of ideas, you are saying that there's a bad form of philosophy, you can't really say that. You need to enter into philosophy. Now you have ideas to tell that there's a bad form of philosophy, but you have to go into it to make that judgment. Most people in my experience are saying philosophy is a waste of time from outside of it, which means that means you can't, where did that idea come from? Like, where did the idea come from that ideas are bad or that philosophy is a waste of? That's a philosophy. Where did it come from?
Exactly.
And you've actually entered into the thing acting like you haven't, and that disavowal creates pathologies, right? You can absolutely go into philosophy and identify bad philosophy, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But you have to go into it. But instead you have this kind of stepping outside, and it leads to issues.
Yeah. Well, I won't, it seems like there's a little bit more on that you want to jump into, which will be great. Really quick, I was just thinking, since I brought up the wonderful Vessel Village and the Village Sessions podcast, makes me think a lot about motherhood. And I do think another thing that has to do with like ideas that are important, and maybe it's also kind of a social relationship to children too, that it's paralleled very much so, because for me, ideas are like concepts, right? There are these conceptions. If you don't honor the conception and the process of that conception, you sort of abort it, and you also you don't value it as something in and of itself that has an incredible power and potentiality and life of its own, right? And that's both risky and it's wonderful, so for me, this ability to like embrace ideas is also, it's almost like when Jesus says, "Come to me, little children." When you have a society that's not like using birth control as a default, etc. Like, just if we want to point to something that's like kind of a technology that may have shaped our thinking regarding concept and conception, there are things that are basically, we're saying, there's a decision to that, which again is an idea, right? So you're still using a conception to sort of counteract conception, but really that might influence our relationship with ideas at large, our relationship to conception at large. Instead of recognizing the incredible power to cultivate and conceive and grow and birth ideas and all of that, which is also akin to birthing children.
I mean, the technological essence of Heidegger is generally a replacement of apprehension with calculation. And apprehension is philosophy. Like, philosophical reasoning is apprehending. You're putting a lot of ideas on the table to apprehend a notion, where calculation is one step leads to second step leads to the third step. And technology trains you into a habit of thinking in terms of calculation versus creating environments in which you can have insight and apprehension. Now that really has to be expanded on, but that's a part of this puzzle that we're pointing to. The other thing too is, I just wanted to note, is that I think when people say things like, and I know we're running out of time, but this is a very important topic. I think when people say things like philosophy hurts relationships, what they can mean is something like, as we're talking about ideas, people on the outside feel alienated and they can't
They feel
enter,
left out.
right?
They feel like
that's
it's
correct.
not inviting them
And
into
so
it.
they don't feel it. Now, here's the issue, though. You're actually in the logic of quantification and capitalism without realizing, because you're saying more numbers equal better. When in fact, you see, often philosophy creates that effect of a sort of insular, because the relationship's becoming more secure. We're actually getting a higher quality friendship. And the issue is that I would argue that's more important than greater numbers. Because if you get greater numbers and it's mediocre, it's going to fall apart anyway, right? Like, is this not the mistake of the church with evangelism at the expense of sanctification? Like, you save people, you get higher numbers, but if the church isn't solid
Mhm.
and engaging, it's going to fall apart.
Mhm.
So the assumption that having a conversation that is more inviting for more people is better than a conversation that has a higher quality of engagement is a bit of a bias that we see in the church, and I think in the society at large, to favor conversation that gets higher numbers because we assume higher numbers is better, right? And now I would actually also argue it's a bit of a false dichotomy.
Mhm.
Like I mean, philosophers shouldn't be, well, this gets into the bad philosophy. Like philosophical people, no, they should not be using a lot of terminology and things like that keeps the other out. At the same time, there's an inevitable level of terminologies that should be used, and people should also not be so quick to say that's stupid. They should be willing to listen to it and warm themselves up to
Yeah.
it and come into it, right? So there's ditches on either side of the road, but that's one thing.
Yeah, no, that's great. And it made me think about like this notion of invitational,
Yes.
you know, where sometimes people feel like, well, that's nice and all, but I just feel
Yes.
kind of left out when
Yes.
you are doing the type of idea talk that
Yes.
you're doing.
Yeah.
And then also people just describe it to, oh, you just must like it, right? Which, yes, it's something that can be
Yes.
very enjoyable.
Because of the
but
quality.
right. It's like, well, you like it because you're not fighting.
Yes.
Like
Because
you're not caught up in some drama. You're
Yes.
talking about ideas, and it's
Yes.
alive.
And it increases your ability to experience life
Exactly.
in terms of wonder.
Exactly.
Yes.
But I do think this, you know, yes, of course, philosophy should not exclude. And unfortunately, a lot of times, these kind of siphoned off, you
Yes.
know, branches of stuff can do that,
Yes.
unfortunately. Or, you know, this kind of high
Yes.
intellectualism or whatever. But really, you know, philosophy is actually this is the interesting thing. I think people are like, well, that feels exclusive. Like literally
Yes.
just us here
Yes.
talking. Okay, this could feel exclusive to
Yes.
somebody.
Yes.
Okay, so then they're like, well, I would like to be invited into that. So you're like,
Yes.
okay, well then you
Come
sort of
on.
like,
Yes.
first of all, no.
All right, so a baby has appeared. So we're about out of time, and there's a lot to say on human
I
but you
know.
were saying exclusive speech.
Yeah, basically just somebody could see what we're doing and say that feels exclusive.
Yep.
That feels exclusive. I
Yeah.
want to be, you know, I'd like that to be invited into that. But then you say, yeah, of course. I mean, I've always found people who do this sort of thing to be very invitational.
Yeah.
You know, they might be talking directly to a person, but they don't mind you listening. They don't mind you jumping in. They don't mind you asking a question. You know,
Yep.
that's
Yep.
right, buddy.
Yep.
We're invitational.
Yeah,
with you.
I've not met philosophy people that are, you can't come in.
Right. But I do think that takes people need to believe in their own capacity to contribute and
Yeah,
ask
they
questions.
need to believe
It's
in
okay.
themselves.
Like it's
Yes.
okay to do that. You are welcome to do that.
Yes.
But also people may say, we want to, I want you guys to be more invitational with us. And then you turn and you say, okay, so like maybe we can sit a little bit
Yeah.
like this. But then the people don't want you to keep talking about ideas.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
It's almost
And is
like
that
if you're talking about
invitational?
ideas,
Yeah.
then you're not hanging out or something.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is like,
Yeah.
well, why?
And is that inviting to cut out ideas
Exactly.
to have that? Yeah,
Exactly. So
that's
I mean,
right.
I'm just saying that dynamic can happen, and it's sort of a strange like, what do people want then? I'm kind of curious what people want. Do people just want warm
It would take
bodies
ideas to know.
and like just somebody to sit in silence with, or maybe to just like, I don't know.
I mean, people disavow their desire. That's
Yeah.
Lacan and all of that. People don't know what they want.
Well, maybe they don't know they want, but maybe they don't know what they want, and also,
The only way
they
to
may-
find what you want is to put yourself in a place where you can learn it.
yeah,
Yeah.
maybe they don't also know the quality that could be had
Yes.
if they were to
Yes.
maybe
Mhm.
if they're willing to open themselves up, because there's a lot of fear around that, and I get that, like as in people say, well, I'd like to try that, but I'm scared my ideas will not sound good, or I'm not sure if I'll ask good questions, and it's just like. I just hope people would let that down, because I understand that it comes from past hurts a lot of
Yes.
times, but he's okay. There's so much richness in the idea talk, in the philosophy talk, that anyone is invited to, and actually it's that's even more alive. It's even more alive when people get to step into that.
Yeah,
and
there's
do
a
it.
few.
Yeah.
So there's a thread here that could be picked up on the idea of how do you find what you desire. It's like I'm thinking Augustine. James K. Smith has a lovely book on Augustine.
Yeah.
Like you encounter your identity. You don't have an identity. You encounter your desire. You don't have desire. Like you have to be surprised by it. You have to find it. And that means you have to be willing to put yourself in the place of things that are new and alien and not familiar
Yeah.
in order to actually be surprised by
Thank you.
your own
Sorry.
desire, surprised by your own drive. Now,
Sorry, buddy.
on the idea of exclusive language, I promise you that the church feels like an exclusive language to the Hindu.
Yeah.
When they talk about the blood of the lamb.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what in the world? That sounds very violent and goth and terrible. The blood. He died on the cross. These are
Yeah.
terrible sounding phrases. Like the entire language of Christianity is exclusive of the Hindu, of the atheist. The Christian feels alienated from the talks of secular society.
Yeah.
I don't know of any conversation
Mhm.
that doesn't have the ability to make people feel excluded.
Yep.
If you get
Absolutely.
but people who love cars and they're talking about the motors or they're talking about
Absolutely.
work, it's
The baseball
exclusive.
talk,
The
right?
baseball talk, I've got all my stats.
Mhm.
It's exclusive. Like conversation becomes exclusive.
Mhm.
And so like it almost has to feel intimate.
Mhm.
Like a conversation where it doesn't feel exclusive tends to be shallow and empty and vague in general. Like that's bad literature. Like literature that tries to be for everyone ends up being for no one, right? Because it's like vague. So like you have to particularize language to become intimate. And if you don't do that, then you're gonna have you might have quantity, but you won't have quality.
Yeah.
And I suppose the last thing I'll say, as we run out of time, although there's Hume and melancholia and philosophical consciousness that's really
yeah.
important here,
Yeah,
and maybe
yeah.
we'll
Maybe
discuss
we'll do a
that.
part 2.
Yeah, maybe. Is that there is though something to be said about unnecessary exclusivity. Like when
Absolutely.
you're not being careful and you unnecessarily exclude people
Yeah,
from discussion
yeah.
because you use terms like hypostatic union or things that people don't know. I think also, I guess I want to say that it also just depends on what kind of ideas. And without getting too much into it, yes, we like to argue that we should not be spending our time simply map making or finding ideas that maintain the internal consistency of our beliefs, but finding the internal consistency of our belief to find the girdle point, to find the place of encountering the others. And I would argue that ideas should be in service of dwelling in the girdle point,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And therefore, if ideas are just used in service of maintaining the internal consistency of your beliefs, that's not a good use of ideas. So in that, and if you want to argue that most people in philosophy just do internal consistency, sure, that's fine, but that doesn't mean the absence of philosophy is good. Nor does it mean that it's a good bet not to do philosophy in global pluralism. So like another way to put this, I guess I'll close with this, is that there's idea talk about, say, maybe the correct way to describe the forms in Aristotle or something. Then there's the idea that there's value in learning to play an instrument even if you don't get paid for it, which actually is going to be very hard because you live in a society that thinks it's a waste of time to do stuff like that. And you're actually going to need the idea that there's value in learning things even if you don't get paid for it in order to defend yourself from your neighbor who thinks you're wasting your time. And if you don't learn those abilities, then yeah, you're just going to be watching
and not
Netflix.
defend in a shut out way, but
No,
just in a way that
to
you don't
have
get
confidence.
to have confidence
Yeah.
where you don't get existentially
Yes.
destabilized every time your neighbor's like, so you're still doing that
Yes.
tuba,
Yes.
John?
That's
or whatever,
right.
because you can
That's
hear it
right.
through the window.
If you don't have the ideas to have confidence in your choices, then you're just going to end up doing what other people think you should do, and your life will probably be mediocre. And in that sense, ideas are a huge deal. Like,
Absolutely.
those ideas, though, but the problem is we tend to talk about ideas as either like they're all just meaningless metaphysical speculation. And I would argue that most metaphysical speculation is not as meaningless as it seems, but to grant the point, is that meaningless metaphysical speculation is not the only game in town.
Yeah.
There's the game in town of identifying that there is a zeitgeist that trains people into a logic of fungibility. Yeah, so I mean there are differences between an intellectual discussion on the fine details of Mises' coordination problem versus Hayek's knowledge problem, but not all intellectual discussions or ideas are about that. I mean, and I'm not necessarily saying that even that idea discussion with Mises and Hayek is a waste of time. But there's also the idea discussion that's going to make you aware that you exist in a zeitgeist that kind of values things by their fungibility, their exchangeability, and how much you can quantify them. And if you're not aware of that, you could be habituated out of thinking it's a good use of time to learn to play an instrument, and then you're not going to be able to hang out with your friends after dinner making music. And so, like, in that sense, ideas really matter because you're going to cut yourself off from that possibility without knowing it. But a lot more to be said than on Hume. But for more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram. And so I said Anchor. I was having a streak. Spotify.
Did you want to mention Third Thoughts?
And Third Thoughts, Amazon. All purchases, reviews are a big help. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.